Hello, this is Lisa Alewine. Welcome back to our study in the 7 Abominations of the Wicked Lamp. And we are so far into the 6th seal right now. We have to be getting pretty close to the 7th seal, right? So let's just recap from the last program to kind of get our minds set about the wilderness. Because remember, in Revelation, we have 2 women, both representing Israel, who go into the wilderness. And of course, we get drastically different pictures. Of course, one woman is the one who's sitting on the scarlet beast. Obviously, here she's merged her identity with Babylon's. We talked in the last program about your citizenship. With whom do you identify as a citizen first? It doesn't mean that you're not a citizen of the United States. It doesn't mean that you're not a citizen of Peru. It doesn't mean you're not a citizen of Canada. But it means that your primary citizenship is with the kingdom of heaven. You never forget that, and you never place your patriotism to your physical nation above that of your spiritual identity as a child of Abraham, as a disciple of Yeshua, as one who acknowledges Elohim as the creator of the universe and not human beings. And he alone as the one who issues laws and decrees by which we should live. And if laws and decrees come into conflict with that from a natural source, then if our citizenship is with the kingdom of heaven, then if pushed to the wall, if forced to a decision, of course, we are going to choose to obey the laws of the kingdom of heaven rather than the laws of kings like King Nebuchadnezzar. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were very clear. O king, we're very sorry, but in this particular thing, any other law, if it's not in conflict, but we're sorry, we can't bow down to your idol. That's in specific, radical contradiction to even just, the basic 10 commandments. You should not bow down to serve an image, and we can't do this, King Nebuchadnezzar. And so the Persian Empire, in which Queen Esther lived, and Mordecai, they came under scrutiny because their first citizenship was with the kingdom of heaven, and then with Persia second. And so that made them a target. And so in Jeremiah 29, when Jeremiah is writing to these exiles in Babylon, he assures them that there is a certain specified, that's redundant, specified period of time that they are going to have to be exiled in Babylon. And while they are there during that specified time, they are to go about their daily business. They are to pray for the prosperity of the nation of their exile. They are to have families, raise children. They are to fully engage as much as possible within that nation of their exile. But again, their primary citizenship, they're not to forget that, because a time will come when that period of their exile is over. And if they have completely identified as Babylonians, then they may not hear or even want to hear. That might be the actual question. Do you even want to hear the call home to Jerusalem? Because you can so become enamored of the commercial systems within Babylon, the comforts that it offers, the creativity that it offers, the outlets for expression, the security, just like the Israelites in Egypt. They kept looking back to Egypt, saying, well, Egypt has the best food. Egypt has the best agricultural system. Egypt has the best commercial system. They didn't really see themselves as fodder for that economic system. But when you're reading in the book of Revelation, and it's the merchants of the earth are lamenting over Babylon, and they talk about all the cargoes that have been destroyed, if you read down there at the end, it says, and human souls. It's actually human souls who were the fodder to create all that cargo, to create the pleasures of Babylon. And so That's Jeremiah. He cautions the Jews in exile, please don't take on that identity, because when this 70 years is completed, you're going to be called home. And if you don't come home, then you're going to be destroyed with that kingdom. Because remember, with these beast kingdoms, it's a succession of kingdoms. And if you identify with this one, well, when another one rises up and destroys it, you'll be destroyed with it. Daniel, he was an anomaly. He was outliving kingdoms and living into the next one to be an important person in that next kingdom and being influential. But for many, they weren't just destroyed. Perhaps even worse, they lost their identity as citizens of Jerusalem. And so that particular woman who goes in the wilderness, who's Mystery Babylon, it tells you now she's a citizen of Babylon. She's no longer considering herself a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. That is second to that Babylonian identity. The other woman is the virtuous woman. She has retained her identity. How do we know? Not only has she retained her virtue, her children are like her. They keep the testimony of Yeshua and they keep the commandments of God. In other words, they're a reflection of their mother. And that helps us understand when Paul refers to Sarah, she is our mother above. She is Jerusalem above. She's different from Hagar, who was a slave. She didn't necessarily engage with Abraham out of choice, free choice. Her circumstances were completely different than Sarah's. But with Sarah and Abraham, it was a love relationship. And he's saying, that's the relationship you have to maintain with the Holy One. And then your offspring can also be a testimony to you, because they will also be like you. They will keep the testimony of Yeshua. They'll keep the commandments of God. And so when the serpent is going to pursue a woman into the wilderness, he wants to pursue the virtuous woman whose children have this testimony and the commandments, because within them is truth. The serpent wants to wipe out the truth of it is written, and he wants it to replace it with I think, I feel, I want. That's what fuels the Babylonian system. I think, I feel, I want is what fuels Babylon. But the kingdom of heaven, you still think, feel, and want, but those thinks, feels, and wants are subject to the Holy Spirit that is within you, transforming you day by day. The serpent doesn't want that. So he would pursue that particular woman into the wilderness in order to spew out a flood of wickedness against her and to try to just drown her words, to try to drown her in a flood of wickedness. But we're given the example as it was in the days of Noah. The serpent might believe he's about to drown her in a flood of wickedness, but the truth is she is about to be set apart from that flood. She is about to be saved from that flood. And it says the earth literally opens up and swallows it. The idea here, again, it's separations are going to occur. Just like in previous programs, we talked about the plague of darkness and how certain Hebrews are thought to have been pruned away in that darkness. Whereas the Egyptians, they're just in darkness, that the Hebrews in that darkness who did not have light in other dwellings, that they were pruned away really even before the Egyptians, if you think about the next plague, being the plague of the firstborn. So it's just like with the plague of darkness. As you see these two women go to the wilderness, there's a separation occurring. The Hebrews who are going to have light in all their dwellings, who are not going to experience death the same way as the unrighteous and the evil and the wicked and the unrepentant, for 3 days and 3 nights, they have light in all their dwellings. It's a Revelation era experience of light where the Lamb is the lamp. But it's side by side, because it says in this darkness you could not see your brother. And the idea here is, yeah, your brother is just like you, maybe on the exterior, but inside there's no repentance. There's no fragrance of good deeds to come. And so that separation that we're seeing in the ninth plague of darkness, I think that's what you're seeing here in the wilderness in Revelation, 12:6, it says, "Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God." Remember the definition we gave of moshav, that a moshav is a community of like-minded people. It says, "This woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days." Now, interestingly, we're getting a lot of information out of the Jewish sources as they comment on the Song of Songs that's helping us to decode some things that John writes in the book of Revelation. And the Midrash goes far as to give very specific predictions about this era that's called the footsteps of Messiah. You might also hear it called the birth pangs of Messiah. You might have heard certain teachers refer to it as Chevlei Shel Mashiach, the birth pangs of the Messiah, the tribulation, a 7-year tribulation. And we tend to focus on that one-time tribulation, but truly every generation will face its own tribulation. This will apparently be the tribulation that resolves all of them. But the Midrash that I think is helping us to explain these two women in the wilderness, it refers to Isaiah 59:15 concerning this specific time period that John seems to be prophesying about. And they say, according to Isaiah, this is a time, it says, when the truth became absent. And that word there is ne'ederet. Ne'ederet. You hear eder or adar, eder or adar, the main verb there. Truth became absent, and it says refraining from evil seemed foolish. Right? If ever there was a generation that applied to, I think it's got to be our generation. I think we've topped them all at this point. And, you know, heaven help us if there's another generation that's worse than we are. But we are now living in a world where the laws of the kingdom of heaven to masses of people seem foolish. And as time goes on, as the laws and the decrees keep rolling down upon us, more and more you can see that the truth is, they're trying to censor out the truth, they're trying to squash the truth, they're trying to erase the truth from history. And in some cases, there's a lot of bad truth out there. And it would be nice if it weren't there, but we need to know it's there so that we won't repeat those mistakes. That's how we learn from them. The Bible is full of mistakes. Not in the text. It's telling about the mistakes of human beings that we don't need to repeat. And so when you start just censoring things that you don't like, you're also squashing those lessons that we need to learn. And so they say this will characterize the footsteps of Messiah, that as the laws of nations are passed, that the idea is they will look at the biblical laws, and you can tell from the laws that they're passing that they think those things are foolish. And you can fill in the blanks right there. I don't have to be specific to tell you what kind of laws are coming down that are now governing us. If we're in the United States, now we're governed by certain laws. I'm sure in other countries as well. And if you keep the laws of the kingdom of heaven, then these laws are designed to mock you and make what you think seem foolish. Like, how dare you say that marriage is between a man and a woman, that there is a difference between a man and a woman. It's like you can't look and see the difference. It's like it completely overrides even logic with its foolishness. And so if we didn't have problems enough, now we have governments participating. It's not that we're not generating enough crazy all on our own. Now we have politicians generating crazy on our behalf. And we keep reelecting them. You know, it's like, if you think it's bad today, wait till tomorrow, right? Because the footsteps of Messiah, I believe, are very close to the door. And if this is what they say Isaiah is talking about, then I can't think of a generation where it better fits in terms of governments actively participating in creating a condition where any person of faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be made out to be a fool and hopelessly behind the times, because their laws are different from that nation's laws. Just like goes back to the time of Queen Esther, when that was the accusation. These Jews out here, they've got their own laws. Are you going to tolerate that? Well, nations will be less and less tolerant of people who abide by the commandments of Scripture. The good news, you say, oh my goodness, you're telling me there's no hope. There is hope. There's great hope. Because we see that the Hebrews managed to form moshvot. Remember, their dwellings, they're moshvot. A moshav is a collection of like-minded people. And so in these moshvot, they had light in all their dwellings. What caused them to group together apparently was a common belief and faith that what Moses had done so far truly was a reflection of what the Holy One was doing in their lives at that time. So the truth will still exist. It's not completely absent. It says it became absent, right? It began to fade away. And that's what we see. The world is trying to apply enough pressure to the truth that it's slowly fading away. But it's still there. They write in their commentary here, they say, if the truth is to be absent among this pre-Messianic generation, to where will it go? They say it will go and dwell in flocks in the wilderness. All right? This is why this could sound familiar to a Jewish mindset. When they're reading the book of Revelation and they read about the two women in the wilderness, well, obviously, this mystery Babylon over here is not the right woman, right? That's not the Israel we want to deal with. But this other woman, she's carried into the wilderness. This is where there's a place prepared for her. That's one of the definitions of a moshav. It's a place where people form a community. They connect with one another. And where it says they will go and dwell in flocks in the wilderness, where are they getting that? Well, it goes back to the verb that was used in Isaiah, where the root of it was adar. Well, becoming absent, it's a play on word, and you could read it and say they dwelled in flocks in the wilderness. That happens a lot in Hebrew. When you pull the vowels out, then you might read 2 or 3 different ways of the same sentence. And if we read this, they say it's what's saying is that when the truth begins to become absent, then people of righteousness will go and dwell in flocks in the wilderness. So, and they're saying the reason they know this is because the sentence does not read the truth is absent, like not there at all. It's becoming, it's gradually disappearing from society. And along with this, their prediction was that in this particular generation where the truth will begin to become absent and people of faith will start to cling to one another, and that's where you go if you want to find truth. You go find one of these flocks in the wilderness and you say, well, where is this wilderness? Well, if you're listening to me, you're probably in one. For lack of a better understanding, I call it a pre-wilderness. Remember, there's 10 plagues. While Moses and Aaron are preaching and teaching, preparing the Hebrews to leave Egypt. I mean, what they're doing with Pharaoh gets the emphasis, but imagine what's going on in the background as they're preparing the Hebrews to leave. And they're reminding them of truths that have been passed down to them from the 12 brothers when they came down to Egypt. I'm sure stirring up in them and saying, hey, remember this promise to Abraham, remember what happened to Isaac, remember these things about Jacob, and remember about Joseph and Benjamin and how the brothers reconciled. I'm sure they were stirring up within the Israelites all these wonderful memories. And if you have felt that stirring in your spirit, If maybe you've been a person of faith all your life, but all of a sudden one day your spirit was stirring and you went back to those first 5 books of the Bible and you were reminded of your heritage from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You started really getting serious about, okay, what's going on with this Shabbat thing? It seems to be very important. You started learning about the feast. He's reminding you of the ancient ways. This is how the truth is being preserved in the flocks in the wilderness. You might be working side by side with Babylonians. You might be working side by side with Egyptians or Persians or Greeks or Romans, but you were already being drawn into this pre-wilderness where truth is preserved. And I think that's why Yeshua said, you're going to hear the Messiah's out in the wilderness, you're going to hear he's in the inner chamber, don't go there. Because my coming is just going to be like lightning. You're not going to be able to mistake it for anything else. It's going to be so plain. But instead, it's like he's saying, wherever you are, is going to be where that wilderness is to begin with. You don't have to go out into the wilderness to find the Messiah. You were in your wilderness. And so hold your position, just like Jeremiah told the Jews in Babylon, hold your position until that appointed time. But they say along with this, what we'll see happen is that an older, righteous generation of spiritual leaders and scholars, they will die. And it's not because they sinned. It's not because they're wicked. It's going to be a test. Because remember, if you see the wicked figs being harvested out, well, if you see a righteous person die, it might be confusing to you. Well, it's an exercise so that you will not be confused. You know people by their fruit. You know a rotten fig from a good fig. You know an unripe fig from a ripe fig. You've stuck enough of them in your mouth, you know the difference. Well, it's the same thing with the Word. You know enough about the Word to know the difference between a rotten fig and a ripe fig. And so if you see a ripe fig, a person of righteousness who passes away during this period preceding the footsteps, or even in the time of the footsteps of Messiah, you don't have to worry that, oh my goodness, was there some hidden sin there that he was taken out of the world? No, it was his appointed time to go, or her appointed time to go. And you're being tested, because remember, the wilderness is to test you, to humble you, to see what's in your heart. And so as some of these older righteous scholars and spiritual leaders, ministers of our generation begin to die, the prediction is that the righteous who are left will grieve. They will grieve very heavily over the loss of these inspirational leaders. And many troubles will come upon these righteous communities, these flocks out in the wilderness. And they will become so repulsed by the corruption of their generation that it will be one of the forces that kind of drive them into these flocks. And, you know, the beauty of this right now is you don't have to physically be with another person in order to communicate with them. As long as we got an internet working, you can connect with people by internet. You can even communicate with like kind and like mind and on the other side of the world, in Singapore, in Australia, in France, Germany, you name it, Hawaii. You can communicate with all, you can kind of form a little flock for support. We see that happening, you know, more and more, people banding together, not just for teaching. Teaching's wonderful, but you also see them banding together to encourage one another and to pray for one another and to exchange information as they encounter the same troubles. I see that in my own online classes. I see in the chat box over there people connecting and helping one another problem solve as these decrees and laws become more and more onerous, as medicine becomes more and more questionable, as it's sucked into that Babylonian system. This exchange of information, I think, is exactly what the pre-wilderness is all about. It's about driving like kind and like mind together, because you're pushing them toward unity. For in the sixth seal, they have to come into unity. And so there was a certain degree of unity that had to exist in Egypt before they could go out in the Exodus. Because look how many problems they had out in the Exodus. Well, if you're even going to get that far, a certain amount of unity has to come into play. And this is where the rabbis are predicting the formation of these little flocks to encourage one another. And it says those places have even been prepared for her. Like it didn't catch the Holy One off guard. He knew that she would need this mutual support as they become more and more disgusted by what's going on around them. And so in a sense, they're withdrawing from society in one way. They might be withdrawing from the commercial system as much as possible. Maybe they're growing more of their own food, trading, bartering for services, goods, and so forth. You might see them cutting off maybe from particular companies and saying, I'm not going to support that, I'm not going to support that. As an individual, you just start unplugging from certain things and then you replug in to other places. And it's in networking with other people like this that they say that truth will continue to exist, even if it's just in a limited way. If you still want to find truth, it can still be found in those flocks. But you can see how it would be harder and harder for people outside the flocks to really seek after the truth. Just like with Lot, you know, he was really the only righteous person left in Sodom. And it didn't sound like a lot of people were seeking him out. And maybe the problem was he was too comfortable there. He sat there too long, when maybe his time to leave was way before that. Maybe he should have never left Abraham, right? But that's our job. Keep listening. We have to know how to deal with the wickedness that surrounds us. And they say that during this period, harsh decrees will be constantly renewed and sent against Israel. And that might also explain Babylon's presence in the wilderness as well. It explains why the serpent is chasing after the virtuous woman in the wilderness. Because it's just like in the United States. We're coming out with crazy laws or crazy rules, I don't know what you call them, directives or whatever, and by the time you fight them and get them struck down in court, they've already rolled out 3 or 4 more things. And so you're constantly being rocked back on your heels by wickedness and harsh decrees, and by the time they say, no, you can't do that, that's unconstitutional, you're already struggling with 3 or 4 major things. And they say, this is the footsteps of Messiah. He's coming. You can know he's coming when these things happen, because the serpent is pursuing you in that wilderness. As you try to withdraw and disconnect from their systems more and more, the serpent's not happy with that. He doesn't just want you disconnected. He wants you dead. He wants your voice completely silent. And they write, while the first trouble is still extant, another one comes and joins with it. And so, do you have any hope? Absolutely, because John sees all this. He sees the serpent pursuing you with the flood of wickedness, and he also sees even the earth will help you. A flood of wickedness that you think, oh my goodness, I will never outrun this. This is like a tidal wave. This is like a tsunami coming at me. What am I? I'm this big. And John says, don't worry. If your point of being in the wilderness is to withdraw from Babylon, to disconnect from that wickedness, then even the earth itself is capable of opening up and swallowing up your accusers, swallowing up your pursuer. And I'm hearing that more and more. You know, a lot of times people will tell me their dreams or things like that, and it just seems like here over the past 6 months to a year, I've been hearing a lot of people talking about dreams or just maybe night visions that they've seen, where people are there and they know they're being pursued, they know they're being sought out in some way, but their pursuers simply cannot see them. And that's not new, by the way. Yeshua did that all the time. When Yeshua got in a bind, he'd just walk through the crowd and they couldn't see him. Don't be surprised if something like that were to happen to you, if somebody were pursuing you to do you harm for the sake of the word.